Hi, Clubhouse kids. I'm going to be reading to you Beverly Cleary's Ralph S. Mouse. It's about a mouse who gets into a lot of different adventures, and we're going to read the series. You might be familiar with Mouse and the Motorcycle, um, or Runaway Ralph. Those are some of the other books that she has written. So I'm going to read this one to you. Okay, Chapter 1. Picture of Ralph. A dark and snowy night. A night wind moaning around the corner and whistling through the cracks dashed snow against the window of the Mountain View Inn. Inside, a fire crackled in the stone fireplace. The grandfather clock, as old and tired as the inn itself, marked the passing time with a slow tick-tock that seemed to always say, "Waiting, waiting." Everybody in the lobby was waiting. The desk clerk, the handyman, the old Matt, who always carried guest luggage to their room, Ryan Brumble, the son of the hotel's innkeeper, and Ralph the mouse who lived under the grandfather clock. The desk clerk dozed, waiting for guests who did not arrive. Matt leaned in against the wall clock, watched the television while he waited for the desk clerk to close up for the night. Ryan, sitting on the floor to watch television, waited for his mother to tell him it was time to go to bed because he had to go to school the next day. So here's a picture of Ryan and Ralph. You see Ralph sitting by the corner there with Ryan. Ralph crouched beside Ryan, waiting for the adults to leave so he could bring out his mouse-sized motorcycle. Unfortunately, Ralph's little brothers, sisters, and cousins, hiding in the woodpile and behind the curtains, were also waiting. On the television set, a sports car crashed into the truck, shot off the cliff, and burst into flames. "Wow." Without taking his eyes off the screen, Ryan said, "There's a boy at school named Brad Kirby who could really like to this movie. He has a BMX bicycle for motocross racing, and his father sometimes drives him to school in a tow truck." A police car followed the sports car over the cliff before Ryan added, "Brad isn't very friendly to me. He's sort of a loner." Ralph was more interested in the television show than in Ryan's problem. "If he had a sports car like that," he said, I wouldn't let it run off the cliff." Ralph was an unusual mouse. He had listened to many children and watched so much television that he had learned to talk. Not everyone could understand him. Those who could were lonely children who seemed to share Ralph's interest in fast cars and motorcycles, and who took the trouble to listen. Other children, if they happened to glimpse Ralph, said, "I saw a mouse that squeaks funny." Matt was the only adult who understood Ralph. Remember who Matt was? Remember, he was the man that takes the luggage upstairs? Another word for that would be like bellhop. Matt was the only adult who understood Ralph. Yes, sir, the mouse is a mouse in a million," he often said. Ralph knew that there were not only a million mice in the inn, there were not really a million mice in the inn, although he had to admit that in wintertime the mouse holes were crowded because his rough outdoor relatives moved inside to keep warm. Ralph's mother said that they had rowdy bunch that had set a bad example for more civilized indoor mice. While Ralph and Ryan were enjoying the commercial for a truck that was zigzagging without overturning, Matt strolled into the room, called Jumping Frog Lounge, and returned with a handful of popcorn. He popped one kernel in front of Ralph. Thanks, said Ralph, who enjoyed nibbling popcorn while watching TV. As the commercial ended, Mrs. Brumble entered the lobby. Come on, my boy, she said to Ryan. It's past your bedtime. You know the manager doesn't like you hanging out in the lobby. Oh, Mom, just let me watch the end of this program, pleaded Ryan. I leave. I'll leave if any guests arrive. At that moment, the rattle of the crunch of the car with chains on it and tires were heard. Ryan rose and walked back out of the lobby so he wouldn't miss the high-speed, siren screaming chase on the television. As he left, he gave Ralph a little wave with his fingertips, a wave no one else would notice. Ralph wished Ryan could stay up all night like a mouse. As the car stopped in front of the hotel and the desk clerk roused himself, Ralph scurried under the grandfather clock to the nest that he had made from chewed up Kleenex, a lost ski lift ticket, and a few bits of carpet fringes he had nipped off when no one else was looking. Beside his nest rested two precious possessions. A possession. What's a possession? That's right, something you own. So something is a precious possession. It means something that's very special to you. Beside the nest rested his two precious possessions, a little red motorcycle and a crash helmet made from a half ping pong ball lined with thistledown, gifts of the boy who'd once stayed in the hotel. Above Ralph, the clock began to grind and groan and strike and bong, bong, as if it had to summon the strength for each stroke. Ralph dreaded the sound, even though it was the reason he lived under the clock. The noise terrified his little relatives, who thought the clock was out to get them. As long as they feared the clock, Ralph's motorcycle was safe. The car door slammed. Feet stomped on the porch. When Matt opened the door to let two people blow into the lobby and past the freezing air went Ralph's nest, swirling into bits. Never mind, thought Ralph, peeking out at the two pair of boots. The kind known was waffle stompers, which had thick treads that held snow. Do you have a room for the night? The owner of the larger boots asked the desk clerk. Let me see, murmured the clerk, who always behaved as if the hotel might be full, even though he knew it was not. Stop pretending, thought Ralph, who was tired of waiting. Well, the desk clerk ended the suspense. I can let you have room 207. Just fill out this card, please. Ralph's keen ears heard the scratch of the pen and saw the rattle of the key. He winced when the clerk banged the bell on the desk for Matt, even though Matt was standing right there waiting to carry the guest bags. Never mind, said one of the guests to Matt. We can find our room. The pair picked up the luggage and stepped into the elevator, leaving behind puddles of melted snow. Cheapskates, Matt muttered. Guests at this hotel often insist on carrying luggage to avoid tipping him. At the elevator door closed, Ralph worried that the puddles might dry before he had the lobby to himself. Time to drag on, the The man in the red vest who worked in Jump Frog Lounge came out, yawned, and remarked that he might as well close for the night. The television station went off air. The desk clerk locked the front door and left. If any more guests arrived, they would have to ring the night bell. Matt began to turn out the lights. At last, his leg. At last, Ralph threw his leg over his motorcycle, adjusted the rubber band, and held his crash helmet in place, grasped his tail so that it would not become tangled in the spoke. Then, because everyone knows a toy motorcycle moves when someone makes the noise like a motorcycle, Ralph took a deep breath and boom, and shot out from under the clock. There's Ralph driving his motorcycle. And if you can see the wet puddles left from the boots, the snow melting from the boots. Gradually, he picked up speed and zoomed through the puddle. Wings of water fanned out from his wheels. It was a thrilling experience. All of Ralph's little brothers and sisters and cousins, hoping Matt would not notice them in the dim light, popped out from their hiding places to watch. Of course, Ralph had to show off. He took deeper breaths and rode faster, making puddles splash higher and leaving little tiny tire tracks on the dry linoleum. Matt, who was banking the fire for the night, laid down the poker to enjoy the sight. Unfortunately, the little relatives who were not satisfied, not now, once Matt's indoor relatives had been happy to have Ralph push them up and down the halls in his motorcycle. But this treat was not enough for his rowdy outdoor relatives. They wanted to ride the motorcycle by themselves, so now all the mice wanted to ride. They came running and jumping across the thoroughbred carpet and the linoleum, squeaking, "I want to ride. Give me a turn. Come on, Ralph. Get off. Let us on it." Ralph started to whiz around in a figure eight when his tire slipped and the motorcycle tipped. He lost control and landed in icy, dirty water. The daring outdoor mice waded out to grab the motorcycle, but Ralph was quick. Dripping and shivering, he sprang back on the seat and rode off, boom, avoiding the clutching paws. If only he could make his relatives behave. "Go away, you're too little," Ralph said through the chattering teeth as he swerved to miss tiny toes. You would forget to hang on to your tails, and you'd get them all tangled in my spoke." He tried to wipe his nose with his wet paw and wished mouse children had to go to bed like any human child. We would not. The rougher mice grabbed the motorcycle and brought Ralph to a halt. And you're not so big yourself. You fell down. All mice began to complain. "You let us ride, or we'll tell your mother on you," she said. They were supposed to give turns. Cousins closest to Ralph in age said it wasn't fair for Ralph to have a motorcycle. Nobody had ever given them motorcycles, and they were just as good as Ralph. Some of the meaner mice told their mothers, said that Ralph was spoiled and selfish, and that he would probably turn out to be no good when he grew up. Ralph was hurt. "I'm not spoiled. I am not selfish," he insisted, as he tried to drag his motorcycle away from all those clutching paws. In his heart, he did not feel selfish. He only wanted something that was his alone. A mouse so rarely has something that he could call his own. "You're greedy," said the cheeky outdoor mouse. Then all the mice, down to the littlest one, who was tangled in the fringe of the carpet, began to chant, "Ralph is greedy, Ralph is greedy." Ralph finally lost his temper and squeaked out the top of his voice, "Beat it, you rotten little rodents!" "Trying to make us," the outdoor mice were defiant, but Ralph could tell they were not as brave as they pretended. Shocked and hurt by such strong language, the little indoor mice fell silent. They looked at Ralph with such sad eyes that Ralph was ashamed. "You said bad words," said one, his voice filled with reproach. Reproach means kind of taken back, kind of sorrowful, couldn't believe. "I'm going to tell you," said another. "My mother wouldn't like you to call me those words." Ralph felt terrible. "Oh, come on," he said. "It's just that my motorcycle is wearing out. The tires are thin, and if they wear out, where am I going to get another pair?" The little mice who would not accept this excuse. "We never had a motorcycle at all," one of them said. "I know, but," Ralph began, not knowing how to finish. It was not his fault. His youngest relatives did not have a motorcycle. Still, maybe he had used language too strong for the little ears. He was only trying to make his pack of pushy, shovey, grabby relatives behave. Matt must have understood Ralph's feelings, for he came to the rescue. "Shoo!" he said aloud, enough to frighten the little mice, but not loud enough to terrify them. The words sent them scrambling back to their places. "Thank you," said Ralph. Think of nothing," Matt said to the fire, gave the fire one last poke before he retired for the night. He left the rapidly drying puddles for Ralph, who took another run through them. Although the water still fanned out from his wheels, somehow the fun had gone out of riding that night. Wonder why the fun ran out. Have you ever felt like Ralph had something that you really liked and you didn't feel like sharing? Warily, Ralph pushed his motorcycle back into the cave under the clock where it was safe. Even though he was wet and numb with cold, he lovingly wiped mud and paw prints from his chrome wheels with bits of shredded Kleenex. Then he began to wipe his exhaust pipe. He discovered they wiggled, loosened by all those tugging paws. The rear wheel stock was too loose. So here's a picture of Mark shoeing, saying "shoo," and there's a picture of the mice running. When Ralph had wiped off the mud and had polished his chrome, he rumbled through the remains of the rest of bits of his nest for the carpet and carpet fringe. Unfortunately, it turned out that would be too tricky for tying the exhaust pipes in place. He felt worse and worse and began to groom his damp fur. His tires were so thin he no longer wanted to risk the wear of riding them on them. Rough surfaces such as carpet. His motorcycle was wearing out. None of the relatives liked him. They were going to tattle on him. In the morning, his mother would venture downstairs to lecture him on the evils of selfishness and bad language. She would also lecture him on his duty to set a good example for little mice. Ralph pushed his nest together again. "I'm a bad mouse," he thought. filled with gloom and guilt. I'm the rotten rodent, not my relatives. As he climbed into his nest and curled up with his tail tight around his body, he wished he could leave Mountain View Inn so he would never have to face them again. But how could a mouse leave in the winter when there was snow on the ground and wind howled? He would freeze, starve, and be blown away. All three, Ralph shivered and pulled his tail more slightly around his body. Chapter 2, Ralph's Decision. So when our next segment, we will read about Ralph's next decision. So thinking points on here is, who's Mark? Who's Ralph? And who is Ryan? Who's Mrs. Brimble? All right. What was one of the problems that Ralph had? Have you ever felt like Ralph before? What do you think might happen next? So next time I read, I want you guys to be thinking about that. All right, chapter 2 next.